Hi all, hope you enjoyed the discussion with MP Erskine Smith. Really pleased to be that he was able to chat with us. Next up, we have our second panel of the day. This is a great group of people that are very strong opinionated about the cannabis sector, and I'm really excited about it. The panel is the Health Canada Act Review Updates, Summary Findings, and Next Steps. Here to moderate and introduce our panelist guests, we have Eric Foster, partner at Dentons, who has done incredible work with the National Cannabis Working Group on preparing responses for the Health Cannabis Act. And we're really excited to have him today leading this conversation with the great panelists that we have. Over to you, sir. Panel's yours.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Nathan. And hello, everybody. Really, really excited to be here. And most importantly, excited to be here actually with this group. Got a terrific panel. I'm very, very excited. We've had a whole bunch of conversations actually with this group leading up to the session, and really interesting conversation. As Nathan alluded to, this is certainly a group that does have opinions, and I know everybody's pretty excited to share those. So I'll let everybody introduce themselves in a moment. I do just want to remind everybody who is listening that we are going to be leaving a good amount of time, hopefully at the end, for some question and answers. So please take advantage of the opportunity to ask our esteemed panel some questions. You have access to the Slido platform, so I'll be moderating that in the back end. So please, we're certainly interested in hearing your questions, but maybe I'll let each of our panelists just give a quick introduction of themselves. After I'll introduce myself first. So I'm Eric Foster. I am a partner at Dentons in the Toronto office. I lead our Canadian cannabis practice and also am the co-lead of our firm's global practice. We're actually the only law firm with a true global cannabis practice, and we have certainly one of the largest and leading cannabis practices in Canada, working with all variety of industry stakeholders, from cultivators, ancillary businesses, retailers. But again, enough about me. Maybe we'll let each of our panelists just give a quick introduction. So on that note, maybe we'll start off with Omar Yarkhan, who is the Senior Vice President of Corporate Affairs and Public Affairs at High Tide.
Oh, thanks, Eric. Yes, as Eric mentioned, I'm SVP for Corporate and Public Affairs at High Tide Inc. We have 104 retail cannabis stores across Canada, and we operate a number of e-commerce platforms in Europe and the United States related to hemp-derived CBD and consumption accessories. I also grew up in politics with George at Queen's Park with the provincial Liberals, and also did a quick stint in Ottawa under Michael Ignatieff as well.
Excellent. On that note, maybe we will turn it over to George. So George Smitherman, obviously very well known, but of course has been doing terrific work as the President and CEO of the Cannabis Council of Canada.
Oh, thank you so much, Eric, and to everybody at the Chamber for having us today. It's my pleasure to have a chance to participate. Sometimes shortest description is as a recovering politician. I spent most of my life in and around politics, including stints in elected office. I've worked for mayors, and I've worked at the national level, and of course at Queen's Park as well. Over at the Cannabis Council of Canada, working to broaden our influence, and really, really excited to have a chance today to participate with this esteemed panel.
Terrific. Thank you so much. And of course, last but not least, we have our good friend Dan Demers, who is the VP Government Affairs at the Canadian Health Food Association. Oh, Dan, you want to just give a quick introduction, maybe on mute? All right, Dan, I think we're having trouble hearing you. I'm not sure if you're on mute. Is there a mute on your phone, maybe?
Right now, is that any better?
Perfect, we got you. Or it looks like you're either frozen or maybe still. So we'll let Dan work out his technical issues, and I'm sure he'll be back to join us in a couple of minutes. So look, maybe I'll just set the table to start off the conversation. You know, one of the things that we've been working on in collaboration with the National Cannabis Working Group and obviously the Chamber is really the industry-led review of the Cannabis Act. As everybody knows, Cannabis Act came into force October 17, 2018, and the Minister of Health is actually required to initiate a comprehensive review of the Act on the 3rd anniversary of it coming into force, which actually just happened a few weeks ago. So this is really the first opportunity to make meaningful changes to Canada's cannabis regulatory regime. And the industry's obviously experienced a couple of years of just rapid maturation. And we've been working hand in hand with the Chamber and stakeholders all across the country, really over the last year, to engage the industry, to launch this industry-led review of the Act, with the main objective to develop broad stakeholder-supported recommendations for the government on how Canada's legislative and regulatory framework for cannabis can really be improved for the benefit of all Canadians. And this is something that Omar and Dan and George have also been actively involved in. So maybe I'll just throw it out there as an initial question, and maybe we'll start off with you, George, and then go over to Omar. You know, you've been involved in this process yourself, and as we're getting closer to the point of actually giving these formal recommendations to the government, in your mind, what are those 2 to 3 most material key items that you really want to see included as a focus of the review?
I think first and foremost, there's a couple of process points that we need to keep in mind and to identify. That with Health Canada at the bureaucratic level, all through the summer, they've been kind of signaling us that this wasn't going to be a very comprehensive review, and they were using language like fine tuning and stuff. So we've really kind of been pushing back and saying, hey, you're not going to meet the expectations that are out there for an industry for a more comprehensive review, to use the words that you did, Eric. So I think fundamentally there's a bit of a process concern that we have, and also that they weren't really intending to have any, as best as we could tell, kind of independent third party outside of Health Canada group, like say a reconstituted task force like first advised on the matter, brought to life. So we got a few process concerns, just to put that on the record. Second thing is that as a strategic objective, if our industry really wants to make progress, we have to get a bigger audience in Ottawa than just Health Canada, because they've demonstrated to us that they're just not sympathetic to the economic messages. And obviously those are a pretty important part of a review. Hey, how's it going out there? And so, you know, I think that's one of the kind of, to your question, like what are the key objectives is, you know, getting an economic lens on our industry means actually action outside of Health Canada. And that's a really important objective. So we're very, very focused on that, bringing other ministers and departments into play. Within Health Canada, we've got nanny state regulation that needs to be looked at. We've got kind of SOP overburden regulation that's just intensely problematic. We've got Health Canada's own porous regulation, which is, you know, which is influencing the amount of production that's coming out of the illicit marketplace. This is a real problem. So those are some of the areas where we would be anticipating that a comprehensive review would, you know, take us inside with a view towards being able to affect change. And just to make, sorry, one last comment is to say, to reflect how difficult it's been for us to get change is the work that we've been doing on this beverage equivalency issue, this 5-pack campaign. That's an obvious fix. It's an obvious mistake, but notwithstanding that, for 2 years, we've had to pound away and not with results so far. And that's really just a reflection on how difficult it's been for us to make adjustments on the go, if you will, to the regulatory model. Thanks.
Yeah, no, great points. And again, anytime you're dealing, and some of this is, it's frankly new to me coming at this as, you know, as a lawyer, you know, I'm not as involved on the advocacy and government relations side. So understanding this whole process has been so interesting to me to see, you know, how challenging it is just to figure out what the right process is to actually get in front of the right people who can affect these changes that, you know, some of them are, and you made a great point with the 5-pack, like that's just obvious, right? It was a clear mistake. It should just be something you'd like to think, okay, no problem. It was a mistake. Let's just fix it. You know, and years later, we're still here. So great points, George. And I'll let Dan, I'll come back to you in a minute and let you introduce yourself now that you're back, and it's great that you are, but do want to let Omar jump in here on his thoughts.
Yeah, look, I think George summed it up quite succinctly. You know, from the perspective of High Tide as a national retailer, you know, we think that one of the lenses, you know, as part of an overall economic lens attached to this review or through some other mechanism, the federal government needs to start looking at how it can help retailers like us who operate in the legal sphere better compete with the illicit market operators that are still out there, right? So if you look at the stats can data nationally, we're still just under 50% of overall sales are still through the illicit market. The number has been coming down. I think it was about 87% 3 years ago. So it is gradually coming down, but it's still a huge factor in terms of the viability of retailers out there, particularly independent operators. So, what we would look for is particularly, the issue around milligram limits per unit of edibles and beverages. We operate stores in Toronto where you can walk like a block down the street and go to an illegal dispensary or call up an illegal delivery service and have like a 200 milligram unit like delivered to your house. So we're not saying that that Health Canada should immediately let us sell 200 milligram units, but 10 milligrams is a little bit ridiculous per unit as a per unit limit right now, given that we're medical patients, regular users, regular consumers. For people like that, 10 milligrams is a little bit, it's a little bit ridiculous. The other thing we would advocate for and look to see some change in, some responsible change in, is the ability for LPs to be able to actually establish consumer brands. That is very, very difficult under the current restrictions from Health Canada, and we know that if you want to attract consumers from the illicit market, there's a few ways to do it. So obviously, one is to lure them with price. Two is to lure them with quality. Those two pieces have improved. So the LPs have really upped their game in the last few years. So those two pieces have improved. But a third piece is the ability to actually establish brand affinity amongst consumers. And that is still quite problematic given the current regulatory environment. And that has a downstream impact on us retailers.
Yeah, for sure. Great points. And I want to actually pull on a couple of those threads. Especially, the first point you made around the maximum amount of THC in a product, and it's always a balancing act. And we heard this throughout the entire engagement process with our review, always keeping top of mind the health and safety objectives that the government has said is of primary importance. But again, the second thing that the government obviously articulated as a primary importance is reducing and curbing the illicit market. So in my mind, those two things have to go hand in hand. And you even think about it. The other thing actually we heard a ton about, this is a very socially conscientious industry. And I actually think it is a complete embarrassment to the industry, the excessive use of single-use plastics, the fact that all of the absolute packaging, for 10 milligrams and then parsing it out into into 5 or 4 2.5 milligram packages, just the waste. Even adding a focus on environmental sustainability, I think is really important. And that's something we heard time and time again from all sorts of stakeholders. But maybe we'll kick it over to Dan. And Dan, thanks. Seems like your technical difficulties have been resolved, so that's great. So I'll let you just give a quick introduction of yourself and the initial question that George and Omar have been sharing their thoughts on. I gave a little bit of a background of the industry-led review that we've been undertaking with all of your active involvement. And just kind of, what are the 2 or 3 key items coming out of that review and everything that you've heard that you would really like to see be a focus of Health Canada's review?
Well, thank you. And sorry about my technical glitch. I hope it's better now. First of all, I want to thank the Chamber and others for actually coming together to do this. A lot of my comments today will be on, yes, the government needs to get their act together, but so does industry. We need to figure out how to work together better so that we get a uniform or aligned message back to government. I am the Vice President of Government Relations and Regulatory Affairs of the Canadian Health Food Association. So we represent product producers and retailers who focus primarily on the natural health product side, but also organics and others. We're very excited about the wellness part of the cannabis industry. And so maybe that would be my comments there. Oh, background, I'm an ex-chief of staff, ex-senior bureaucrat. I'm a lobbyist who also used to be in government. When we look at the legalization, obviously when it first started, they were looking from our perspective at 3 main streams. One is medical, one is recreational, one is wellness. We really think the wellness side has not gotten the attention that it should. And we look at that from 2 perspectives. One, first of all, the overall impact on the health of Canadians. What does it mean when there's such a strong illicit industry there? That affects the health of Canadians. But there's also the economic side. We really think that the economics of the wellness side of this industry is a tremendous opportunity for Canada. So when we look at what our priorities are, it's how are non-intoxicating phytocannabinoids being managed under the Act? How do we make sure that we can have a wellness industry that brings consumers in Canada around the world CBD, but other products in the wellness space? Secondly, we really think the government needs to focus on the barriers to research. A lot of the safety issues, the efficacy issues are going to be resolved through research. Government will say we need to know more. Great, work with industry on getting those answers. And that starts with, let's get some of the barriers out of the way so we can do collaborative research and we can make sure that it's disseminated into clinical practitioners. And then the last piece is address packaging and branding. I know that other industries are looking at this from a marketing or brand loyalty perspective, but we also see it as a way to inform consumers. There are a lot of things you can do in branding, packaging, and labeling that allows consumers to make better informed choices. So our excitement is around the wellness stream, but we really think the government's dropped the ball on it. And we need to work together as industries to make sure that they pick it up and take advantage of it for both the health of Canadians, but also for the economic opportunities that it presents.
Right. So great point, and actually it ties into quite nicely into the second thing I wanted to talk about, which is really how can government and industry collaborate, right? Like what we're trying to do here, obviously, is to maximize the economic impact of the sector, while still, of course, focusing on the health and safety priorities of the government. But again, you guys deal with this day in and day out. You all have government backgrounds. Like, what is the way that we can help proliferate that sort of collaboration in terms of getting the government and industry to work together so we can just get this done? Like at some point, things just have to get done. So George, I know this is something that's probably near and dear to your heart.
Thank you. And I just want to broadly align myself with the comments of Dan and Omar before that. I really do feel strenuously that we have a real challenge in what I call official Ottawa, which is the practiced deferral of everybody of all things cannabis to Health Canada. And I've been in government and I've been a busy person, and I know what happens when you have the opportunity to deflect your file somewhere else. And very often, if you're not forced otherwise, that's what you do. And that's what's happening to us all over the place in Ottawa. I think actually relationships is at the heart of shifting that. And I believe quite strenuously that the licensed and regulated sector needs to find its form in relationship building with members of parliament as one very specific aspect to try and shift the situation to the one that we look for aspirationally, where we've got government and industry working together. We're a long way, we're quite a ways from that. And I think that in addition to creating a situation where more of those, let's say, economically focused departments actually see us as part of their mission and part of their mandate, that having more constituent members of parliament asking questions, regardless of what party they come from, frankly, that's immaterial, but showing an interest in our sector and asking questions of relevant ministries and playing those roles in relevant committees like the Health Committee, those to me are all part and parcel of creating the conditions that we see aspirationally, that situation where our industry is broadly respected to the point that we're having this nice engagement with government. That aspiration to me is informed by relationships. And I think MP relationships are a bedrock aspect of that for an industry like ours, which has one massive strategic advantage in my mind, which is its broad geographic distribution. Many industries that lobby in Ottawa are quite regionally focused, and ours is everywhere. And that's a power that we have yet to uncork, but I think that it's within our midst to do so. So I'm a strong advocate for that piece of it.
I just want to build on that. I completely agree with George. I think he's right on as far as the importance of the relationships with the members of parliament. We meet with MPs all the time. They get our stores, they get our producers. And yet when you ask them to talk more generally in public about cannabis, they're more nervous. So I think it really is important we have those relationships, that we have aligned messages so they're not hearing different things from different people. But I want to go back to something that George said I think is critical, and that is that Health Canada's mandate does not include economic issues. And yet we're looking at this sector, whether it's economic growth or the impact of health of Canadians that affects the economy, we need other departments. We need industry, we need foreign affairs, we need agriculture, we need other industries to be around the table. And I think the best way to do that is to use the review of the Act to have stakeholders engaged, to have this as a public review, to actually engage members of Parliament, industry, health groups, others. Let's have a public discussion about something that we all agree is a great opportunity, but government and politicians are a little reticent to be seen talking about it. So remove it from a health concern and start focusing on things like economic opportunities by having other departments involved. We completely agree, George.
So just to provide some context, some political context around this issue, the vast majority of Canadians now, and polling bears this out, are comfortable and have accepted cannabis legalization and think it's largely worked well. You know, there's issues around clustering here and there, and certain things pop up from time to time. But about 2/3 of Canadians now, including in several multicultural communities, which were the most reticent for a long time, have now accepted legalization. The challenge is the minority that still has a high level of stigma tends to be concentrated in certain suburban federal ridings and provincial ridings in and around large cities that tend to be critical ridings in winning elections. So if you're a politician, all you see is risk. And we can make all the rational arguments we want. And I do completely agree with George, those one-on-one relationships, particularly with members of Parliament, are very important. But we can make all of those one-on-one arguments that we want. If we want to get those people to say what they say to us in private publicly, we need to create the parade. A politician will very rarely create a parade. We need to create the parade as an industry to enable the politicians to jump on the bandwagon. So we need to be talking about the $20 billion a year contribution to Canada's GDP that this industry now contributes. To put that in context, that is larger than motor vehicle sales motor vehicle manufacturing contribution to Canada's GDP. I was the Chief of Staff to Ontario's Minister of Economic Development and Trade. If the auto sector sneezed one day, my minister and I would be on a plane to meet with the head of Unifor, to meet with the head of the three big manufacturers, to meet with the head of Toyota. We would jump. Similarly, after George was the Minister of Health in Ontario, I was the Chief of Staff to a subsequent Ontario Minister of Health. If the life sciences sector, sneezed, they wouldn't always get what they wanted, but we would be there engaging with them immediately. And again, if you look at the GDP numbers from StatsCan, cannabis's contribution to Canada's GDP now is almost at par with life sciences. This sector, many of the LPs that George represents, have saved Rust Belt towns in this country that, quite frankly, were dying, particularly in the aftermath of the economic downturn of 2008 to 2010. So if you look at towns like Leamington, I was Chief of Staff to the Ontario Minister of Economic Development when Hines announced that they were leaving Leamington, and the shock wave that went through the government at that time, based on that announcement, it's hard to describe. And that town, yes, they still have challenges, but cannabis cultivation and cannabis production helped keep that town alive. Similarly with Smiths Falls, there's many other stories across the country. We don't tell that story enough as an industry, and we need to start doing that. It's very easy to get bogged down in the day-to-day earnings, and that's very important. We all have businesses to run. We all have positive EBITDA to achieve. We all have, many of us have shareholders to keep happy. But if we don't start telling this story, we are not going to get the politicians to engage and to talk to us about a legislative and regulatory environment that is conducive to continued viability and continued growth of the industry.
So,
sorry,
go for it.
Yeah, sorry, just building something Omar said. Omar, I agree with you almost completely. And I do agree on the economic side, particularly at the local level for MPs. And that message is really important, and want to work with George to get that out there. But I think governments also fall in the trap that if something is already there, they take it for granted. So yes, it is an important message to make. But I think the other message is, where can the industry go?
Absolutely.
What can we do? So I think the attraction of research, I think the wellness products and the opportunities for Canada to sell wellness products around the world. So I agree with you. We've got to talk about the economic impact, but they often go, well, I've already got that. I make sure I don't lose it, but I've already got it. They get really excited when we could get together and say, hey, this is where we're going as a country, and you are part of that. So I agree with you, but I think we've got to balance the future as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Just to Dan's point, though, part of the sad reality, which will be part of the context of the statutory review, is quite a bit of what we've built is at risk. And if half of the sales, generally speaking, continue to go to the illicit marketplace, if we don't have an answer for high dose edibles, as was mentioned well by Omar, as just one more example, then what's the retrospective going to be after 5 years? Is the story going to actually have transitioned to missed opportunity or what have you? I think these risks are real, and they're best put on the table by the people that are experiencing them. In my world, that's those 700 license holders of Health Canada under the Cannabis Act, who can tell that local story and can also get nominated for the Chamber of Commerce Jobs Award for jobs creation and such, which also, significant contribution to eliminating stigma. Because I think, I'm not sure, but I think stigma is more deep, even though we can see in the polling that Omar mentioned, and we've done polling also that showed even higher numbers, approaching really 80% of people that are at least shoulder shrug with respect to legalized cannabis. But stigma runs deep within EDC and BDC, notwithstanding those polling numbers and stuff. So I think it's important for us to be able to press that economic case. Again, I think it's very advantageous localized. All politics is local. That can be a real attention getter. Oh, I've created 40 jobs, and they're very vulnerable to price compression on flower because we, the LPs that are producing this stuff, are bearing all the burden for price competition with the illicit market, while almost every province kind of gouges at the distribution level and takes more, takes a really fat share of things, et cetera. So I think that sense of urgency is also going to be part of the context of this statutory review, because there's a tremendous amount of anxiety and vulnerability out there for a licensing model that's very difficult to operate within.
I'll just throw in one other layer that's an ongoing pet peeve of mine. Some of you have seen me write about it in the past. We do have to look in the mirror again as an industry, and our industry has to look like Canada at all levels, including the executive level. And currently, that is not the case. There's some exceptions. I think our company, High Tide, is an exception to that rule. But those writings that I mentioned,
making the point.
Those writings that I mentioned earlier, and George knows this, and Dan knows this, are highly multicultural. And a lot of that stigma, that minority opinion, some of the most vocal advocates of that minority opinion are from those communities. And I think the industry has a bit of blinders to that because of the composition of the industry. I think as we become more diverse, senior executives will start to understand the need to start engaging with some of these communities, to start countering some of these narratives that are out there. But I think that's been a huge blinder, because look, if everybody looks the same and comes from the same background and thinks the same, you're not necessarily, you don't really have your ear to the ground in places like Markham or Richmond Hill or Scarborough or Metro Van, where some of these narratives are percolating.
Yeah, can you just Bill and Omar, you're exactly right, and it's a challenge all industries faces, but I think this industry in particular, because we're trying to create this profile of we're Canada of the future. So I think you're exactly right. I hope everybody listens to that. One of the solutions maybe is how to make sure that the small to medium-sized firms are engaged in this industry and can grow, because they tend to be the more grassroots tend to be more, I think, more reflective of Canada. So there may be something there. I find often the discussions don't reflect what some of the smaller companies have. I mean, we have that in our industry as well. But I think the other thing, I just sort of building on this how to have a better discussion with government. Aaron, I think a lot of people know that our focus is on CBD products. We'd like to provide CBD products that contain no THC. And part of that is to normalize CBD, to normalize its consumption, to normalize it's something that the people in the communities you speak about, Omar, or older Canadians, they don't see cannabis in the same way because they've had some exposure to the wellness industry. So I think that the normalization through CBD and wellness will be part of the long-term political engagement that we can do. And we're finding a very positive message. They go, listen, this is great. It's wellness. A lot of politicians are actually CBD consumers and they call and get advice, even though we're not supposed to provide it. There's a normalcy that's growing, but we need to get that out of the public by again, having our industries talk about this wellness industry as part of the future of Canada. And I think that will help normalize it for the entire cannabis industry.
You know, alongside that, I think that putting a little more focus back on medicinal cannabis would also be beneficial to us because we lost the narrative there substantially with adult recreational legalization. A couple of words on diversity. First, to say, well, this panel is also a reflection on something of a problem that we do have in the industry, even with respect to gender diversity. And I know that everyone's making efforts. At the Cannabis Council, my board, we're working always towards trying to have at least 50% female participation. In our recent report card, where we marked the government as a D overall for the impact of legalization, we gave them a poor mark for the participation also of diverse communities from the standpoint of proactive programs, which reflected the necessity, the social obligation of providing more support to those communities that have been suppressed, had opportunities suppressed and been impacted by criminalization. And in making that comment to them, we understand that it has a boomerang effect where people can obviously hold the mirror back at us. And I think as an industry, it's really important to recognize there are many shortcomings. There's a lot of great stuff on an individual company basis that I can point to with, you know, Flower Corporation doing an amazing work around pardons and many, many other companies exercising really, really good social values and all of that. But to say this is an area where the government could do better is to recognize also it's an area where we have an obligation to do better in the ways that Omar has spoken of in terms of engagement of certain communities, but also making sure always that we reflect that it's an industry, it's a sector, but it's a community. Cannabis, cannabinoids is a community. And if we move together with a focus on social improvement alongside an agenda of commercial improvement, this is how we're also going to be more impactful. At C3, we never talk about issues where we're not also advancing the disgraceful fact that we're taxing medicinal cannabis. Hello. That's not right. And we've got a really disgraceful rate of progress on the expungement or pardons of people that were criminalized. And these are actually things that kind of would seem to me to align well with the social objectives of the government overall. And we need to continue, in my opinion, to make sure that if we're going to be influencers, it can't just be industry and sector, which is, you know, sometimes tends to be bottom line, but that we move as an army of a community. And we're always trying to engage with more and more partners. And our report card reflected that also, with Cannabis Amnesty and Normal participating and others that actively engaged in giving us advice on the content.
Yeah, but George, I want to jump. Sorry, Dan, I do want to jump in, and I do also just want to quickly remind people, please do send in your questions. You know, we have the Slido panel, so we're monitoring that, and we'll jump to a Q&A session after. Dan, I'll let you go. I wanted to pull a little bit on the medical thread, but want to hear your thoughts.
Okay, well, and I was going to ask about the medical thread, so I'll leave that for you, but I just want to build on what George said. I think the underlying messages that you're repeating there that are social conscience, how to get growth at all levels, how to deal with the wellness and medicinal side much better. I think those are all absolutely critical messages. And what we need to figure out is how do we share those and how do we engage governments with those consistent messages across the board? Because George, what you said is really important, but we got to make sure we're all saying it. And I think that's part of how do we as an industry make sure that we are having those messages beyond the economic side that are so important.
like one thing that, one thing that I'm going to try and catalyze, and I just mentioned it here because I'll be interested for people to reach out and offer feedback, is that, a lot of regulated industries have impactful moments on the annual calendar of Ottawa. And that's not something that we've managed so far, to cut through all the noise of all the other groups and to actually, go there and press our issues forward. But because of the point that I made a second ago, which is we're not just an industry or a sector, but there's such a diverse community that, I really think that there's a good prospect for some form of organized convergence on an annualized basis in Ottawa, where the whole community comes there and seeks to make their impact on a broad range of things, including, as I mentioned, those social objectives, which to me really underline a lot of the prospects and motivations for the work that we're involved in. So I think, that's something that I hope to try and, bring forward some ideas where all of the parties that are on the call here could find a reason to, lend energy towards making more of an impact and breaking through in official Ottawa. And Dan, that doesn't happen. Like you're making the point, we need to find alignment because, it's easy to be a fart in the windstorm out there where you think that you're doing great work and you've put all kinds of effort into writing this letter or this mandate letter or this press release. And it's very, very easy to be lost in the ether despite all of the effort that one might put into it. So concerted effort that's, engages as many folks as possible, that's going to be necessary to move the yardsticks, I'd say. So
yeah, well,
I'll give an example of how that's worked in real time. I won't name the organization just from my own personal experience, but there was a group when I was the health minister's chief of staff in Ontario, and George probably knows who this is. Every year they would come, they would host a Queen's Park Day, they would host a reception at Queen's Park, and their big issue was around a particular scope of practice expansion for a regulated health profession. And, the minister was on side, the political staff were on side, the senior levels of the bureaucracy, there were roadblocks for a number of reasons that I won't get into. And we just didn't have the bandwidth with everything else going on to push back against the bureaucracy on that issue. Until one day at their reception when they were speaking, the Premier's director of policy was standing right next to me and turned to me and said, I've been coming to this reception for 3 years and they always say this, like, why hasn't this gotten done? And my response was, listen, if you can give us a push from the Premier's office, we can navigate this through the bureaucracy because the minister's on side. And that's exactly what happened. And they got that scope of practice expansion. So my point is, and to what George was saying, we have to be there. We may not get it immediately. We have to be there. We have to keep at it. We have to keep repeating. Eventually, the message gets through. But if we're not there, the message will never get through.
Yeah, and I think we can all agree that we've been living under a regime that's been very much defined by Health Canada bureaucrats and very few other people, and we need to break out of that. We all know of being in politics, if you get 5 different groups speaking on the same issue, you don't want to make all of them mad. You make them all a little bit mad by doing nothing. It's when one group comes in with one consistent message, you're going to make everybody angry by not doing it. That's how you win. If it's fractured, politicians will divide and conquer. That's what we do as political staff. Don't have the issue blow up, make everybody a little bit angry and do nothing at all. It's the easiest political course. To overcome the bureaucracy, a couple of things. First of all, we have a minority parliament. They cannot control the committees of the House of Commons. So we have that as an opportunity. George mentioned meeting with MPs. Bureaucrats have to write briefing notes to politicians about the meetings they're having with their MPs. So we know the instruments to do it. We have to break through a regime defined by bureaucrats and get the other departments engaged. But the most important thing is that consistent aligned message to all venues, and then we will push the bureaucracy out of the way and hopefully get a much better discussion about the new regulatory regime.
Love it. Hey, for my part, I'm going to official Ottawa for face-to-face meetings that haven't been possible since I started this job on March the 2nd of 2020. Aside from one reception. When I think of a convergence event in Ottawa, I don't want anyone to think it's like just the Queen, just the reception. my working title for that, I call that grass on the hill. I don't know if that sounds good or not. Dan probably would say, perhaps we should say cannabinoids in the cap.
Sure, okay, yeah, wellness on the hill, I don't know.
But you know, but I think we could get a good working group together just with the participants here, and I'm open to that. But something that celebrates culture, something that recognizes social needs, something that brings people together in philanthropic action, something, you know, something that's provocative and the like I think that there's so much going on in our industry. And anyway, I love to catalyze that conversation further. And just to mention is I work for the cannabis industry, and part and parcel of my offer to my member companies is I'm going to be spending more time in Ottawa. If you have a staff person that, you know, would like to get some meetings with your locals, but, you know, is nervous or inexperienced of that, or can break through and get those meetings, I can be your tag along. So I'm really also letting people know I'm going to spend a bunch of days every month in Ottawa. And if there's meetings that you'd like me to tag along to or tag team on, then please know that we're open to that kind of collaboration always.
And as someone who's located in Ottawa, George, you let me know when I can come and be your wingman and help that message. But I do think we have a very good message. The other thing I would just really stress is, let's not forget, Canada we need to do better on research, but there is a lot of research that's growing. And I think for Canadians and governments, they're nervous because they're not sure what information to rely on. So I think whatever we do with MPs, let's remember too that Canada is a world leader, not as far as we need to be, but we're a world leader in some aspects of research. And that's a message we should be proud of. And it help ensure Canadians have more confidence in where we're leading them. So.
Two quick points on research. Number one is, you know, Health Canada has really imposed a very difficult to achieve standard for human, you know, research involving humans and everyday cannabis products. They've made it much more difficult over the last 2 years. And a lot of research funded by other governments' department can't make it through the regulatory model as it exists. We've been banging away on that. Another research problem that we have to be eyes wide open about as an industry is that there's a lot of funded research out there that's actually proactively interested in landing some blows to us. So you can actually see in the media stories that are written by researchers, there's all kinds of canary in the coal mine. We're expecting this and they're looking for that. And working with Stephanie Lund from Aurora, we've already had to push back on some really terrible research about that misunderstood access by youth who end up in emergency rooms to edible products, where they tried to lay it on us when actually practically you could, and I'm not that, you know, I'm a high schooler. I didn't go to university post-second, but you could easily see that the data was very, very badly skewed. And we wrote to the clinical toxicology and got kind of a rebuttal or what have you. My point is, as an industry, we also need to be eyes wide open that on some of the things that we wish to achieve, like say, not just a low dose edibles strategy, but a higher dose edibles approach, that there are aligned interests out there that are sometimes dealing in bad data development and research that we have to keep our eyes on and be prepared to press back on when we see it. So please be mindful of that also.
Well, and you know, I agree, George, and you know, facts are depend on who creates them and who spins them and uses them. So you have to always be mindful of how quote unquote facts are being used, what are in fact the facts. But I think the other thing is it just going back to, you know, clearing things up. I think, for example, in our industry, there's a lack of understanding about where our industry sees we fit in this. I mean, we consider ourselves a potential market for your CBD. We don't want to create THC products that contain THC. We want to create CBD products. Great. We will be a consumer for your industry. We also think we can work together on regulations and on global access. So I think part of it is again, that sharing of information within our sectors, aligning on messages and going forward. We actually see ourselves as natural ally for the cannabis industry. We just need to find these tables to get around and actually go to politicians and say, listen, farmers, natural health people, organic people, people interested in sustainable, we are all aligned with the cannabis industry. I think that's a very powerful message and something we should work on.
Dan, you know, I think over the time that I've been engaged, and as you and I have become known to one another a little bit, that there is more movement within the industry to that point of view. Whereas I might have found 2 years ago more people that held to the view that CBD is a cannabinoids and those are ours, and the regulatory line should be drawn here. But, you know, as a former retailer, I could see the broad expansive network of products that, you know, that broad network for products rather, that could be, you know, could be beneficial. But the point is, like, we're very, very keen to look for points of alignment, because I think strategically, you know, the point that I think we're all trying to reinforce is that we're not going to, it's going to be hard enough to get anywhere aligned, and it's going to be damn near impossible to get anywhere if we're actually sowing much division amongst us.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm gonna jump in here, although this is easily the easiest moderating job I've ever had, because I don't need to even wind you guys up. You just go. It's phenomenal and so insightful. But I do want to jump to a couple as we're getting a little tight on time. We do have some terrific questions from our audience, and I'll pose the questions in a second. But I think it's important. You know, we touched a little bit on medical, and again, that was something we heard so frequently over the course of our review and our stakeholder engagement process, that there's a real concern out there that adult use has really had a negative impact on the accessibility and, frankly, the quality of medical cannabis. And beyond that, you know, there's not necessarily standardized testing. And this is medicine for people who suffer from a whole sorts of different illnesses, chronic pain or other ones, who really do rely on that steady supply of consistent quality medical cannabis. And then we also heard a lot about kind of a lack of understanding out there, just a lack of cannabis literacy. And of course, I think, George, you pointed out earlier, the industry is increasingly legitimized. But still, that really highlights a need for Health Canada to relax, whether it's the marketing and promotional restrictions that Omar alluded to earlier, which really do, I think, at least inhibit consumer education, and trying to get the government to put more resources towards those educational campaigns, so that patients and medical professionals can really learn about the safety and health benefits of cannabis. So I'm hoping you guys can pull on some of those.
Sorry, Eric, and also, how about Health Canada and governments to run campaigns that highlight the risks that are embedded in illicit products, when all kinds of testing labs are reinforcing that? Like, we really, yes, like, we're looking for ways to communicate with our consumers in a marketing context, really, you know, loosen, alter the regulations, but also it's like, come on, you people have all the money, you have all the responsibility and all of the public health obligation to improve public safety, and still they're seemingly kind of blasé about the entrenched nature of the illicit marketplace and the risk to Canadians of those products. So that's something in our report card that we also kind of banged away at them on.
Here's where I'll give the Ford government some kudos, actually, in Ontario. I think under the Ford government, Ontario was the first province to actually take out such advertising as George has mentioned. And not only did they take it out in mainstream media, but they actually bought advertising space on a cannabis platform on Leafly Canada, which would have been unheard of, you know, when George and I were in government. So, you know, I've been critical of the Ford government on some issues, but on this one, I think they're ahead of the curve.
Well, and I think by having the industry aligned on that message back to government, you have a responsibility to protect Canadians from the impact of illicit products. We've all seen studies in Canada, around the world, about what's in these products. It's in our interest. It's in the health of Canadians' interest. It's in the government's interest. If, you know, you want to get rid of the illicit market, point out the kind of crap that they're selling to Canadians, the risk presents. So I think our alignment on that message, the government saying you must do more of this, is an important alignment message. But I also just want to, on the issue of research, and I think getting the research done, getting it disseminated, and ensuring that it gets into clinical practices is key as well. So agree on the alignment on the messaging around illicit. I do think on the research side, we've also got a line on that message. The need to make it more easy to do research, but also to make sure that the public and particularly clinicians have access to it.
Right. So I think we've talked a little bit about, at least at a high level, and I appreciate we're running out of time, so we may not be able to get into too much more. But some of the things that we can expect, and the most important changes that we're really hoping come out of this government review. We talked about the packaging, marketing, promotion. We talked a little bit about deschedulizing CBD and trying to get CBD products regulated as natural health products, perhaps, rather and available in drugstores, frankly, just like they have in the U.S. Rather than having CBD products only available in licensed dispensaries. So we've talked about some of the things that we expect to come out. We talked a lot about what at least I believe is an absolutely staggering opportunity for Canada, for the economy. So no pressure on the group, but we got a great question here from one of the audience members saying, you know, how can the cannabis industry emulate others? And a good obvious point is agriculture. And there's some terrific comments actually in the comment panel talking about that. Like, how can we better bring this whole industry together to advocate for these policies that really do help the sector? Because at the end of the day, one voice, you know, the industry is going to have to be able to speak with one voice, which we realize is no easy task. But what additional steps can we really take to emulate other industries where they do have that ability? You know, kind of goes to your point earlier, Omar, where you said, oh, if the auto manufacturing industry sneezed, you know, we'd be right there. How do we try to get that same?
So join the National Cannabis Working Group, join C3. Yep. Right? I know it's tough in cannabis across the board. Money's tight everywhere, but these are investments that are worth making, because if we don't make the noise that is necessary to get the politicians to intervene on this and provide direction to Health Canada to have a broader review, we're not going to get anything out of the review. We're going to get a review that looks at you know, impacts on Indigenous communities, which is important. We're going to get a review that looks at impacts on youth consumption, which is important, but we're not going to get any of those broader economic lens pieces at all unless we can, as I said earlier, create that parade, that bandwagon that politicians will be willing to jump on. So the first thing you can do is, if you're not a member of the Cannabis Working Group, or if you're not a member of C3, join.
So just and Eric, you mentioned one voice.
George, by the way.
One voice. I would caution on one voice. In fact, it needs to be an alignment of voices. We'll never have one voice. There'll never be one organization. With all due respect to George, we're not joining C3. That's not what we do. But I do think there's.
Why are you saying with all due respect to George? I never asked you to do that.
Oh, no, it's no. I never said you'd ask.
I was talking about licensed producers and retailers.
He was talking about licensed producers. I can't join as a licensed producer. But I do think, as much as there's alignment, I think the other thing is to reach out to those other sectors that bring more of their reputation to the discussion as well. There are many other partners out there who could see alignment with the cannabis sector, ours being one of them, but there's many others as well. So I think, as you said, Omar, build that parade. That parade has to be other industries as well, and they're willing to come on board. And I think by the cannabis industry getting more aligned, and then allowing alignment with other industries, will create that parade. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here, because I think there is alignment between our industries, but we've got to do more and have other industries in the room as well.
You know, Eric, I'd say, you know, successful regulated industries have industry associations, and I think that more and more participants in our industry are coming from a lot of those regulated spaces. So kind of the trend is on. I think also people recognize that they want to have lean staff resources. That industry association sometimes is kind of like your GR staff or what have you. So I think that's why we've been able to grow our membership base quite a lot. And we really strike a balance where smaller players really pay quite modest fees in the grand scheme of things. So those are all kind of part and parcel of the formula. Then, as I mentioned, we work with others as a community. That's why I'd outreach to Dan and work with Cannabis Amnesty and Normal and the Working Group and C45 Association and all of that. But I just want to go back to where you started this question, Eric, where you kind of went through a bunch of the issues that we've talked about, where we would hope to see progress. And you really covered we really covered a lot of them, you know, the edibles, packaging, branding, advertising, communication. But one thing that I really think we have to keep in mind here is we have a big problem on the production side. That's Health Canada's. That's also in the Cannabis Act. And I think that even though less has been said about it, the reality is that's a very, very porous situation. You look at the OPP or BC Public Safety have very strongly condemned the nature of it so far. And frankly, licensees very often bear a lot of blame in communities because these out of control personal production facilities are so big, people think they're license holders under the Cannabis Act. Anyway, my point being, that's also something that we should hope for at least, and demand action from in the context of the statutory review.
Eric, I think if there's time left, I think I saw a question come in from Mohan about the provincial formularies and cannabis coverage. I thought it'd be a good one for George to weigh in on, given his background.
Well, do you want to read it, Eric? Because I wasn't really scrolling through the questions.
Yeah, no, I see it here on the side. So I wasn't on title, but I see yeah. So and again, I am a little bit mindful of time. So maybe, George, if we can get your comments on this just briefly, and then I'll go around and maybe everybody can make a quick final remark. But the question was, could provincial drug insurance coverage for select medical cannabis products function as a catalyst for the domestic industry while also providing valuable medical evidence for international sales?
You sure would love to think so. I wonder if the breakthrough might first come with cannabis as an option in the context of some form of opioid replacement or something. So yes, for goodness sake, a breakthrough on public drug formularies is necessary, but so long as Health Canada is taxing it, that's going to stand a little bit, as a contrast to it being taken seriously for its medicinal purpose. But yes, that's an objective that we have to have.
And I see another question just came in, and this was also on the slide, but can we expect CBD products to be regulated and be allowed, to be deregulated out of the Cannabis Act and allowed to be sold in drugstores? And I can tell you that's something we've heard time and time again. It's certainly something that's part of what the Chamber and Dentons, and I think everybody here is focused on. Whether it will happen, I guess remains to be seen, but it's certainly another, in my mind, an obvious fix to make.
I just sometimes offer the word low dose as a bit of a characterization to what you just said, because I think that, if you look at Epidiolex approval or what have you, it's not like, hey, CBD is without, no dosage, like, et cetera, et cetera. There's still dosage issues, which are going to be in the mindset of the regulator. So I just, Dan's been trying to help me on this, but I think, some kind of low dose characterization might be well associated with the policy objective that you just outlined.
And can I just say, just in a general context, George just alluded to conversations we have. It is so helpful for our industry to have somebody in your industry to talk to, where we can call up and say, what is this? What is your thinking? So I think the more our industries can get aligned and share those messages, the more I can call George and go, George, what do you think of non-THC natural health products? And we were talking, yeah, low dose seems to make sense. So I think having the ability to have these discussions is going to be absolutely critical. I did notice there was one question from someone from Kelowna. I think that's the other thing, is that local economic development, and George, you've alluded to this in meetings with MPs, it's the local economic development opportunities that we can create. The member of parliament from Kelowna talking to the minister, that's where we're going to make a difference. So I think, again, let's get aligned, let's get our messages, and let's get them to the MPs so they get them to the minister, and we get Health Canada out of the way. Or less in the way. Maybe that's the best way to say it.
All right. Well, we're down to our last minute yet, but Omar, I think I would love some kind of final thoughts from you again. I think I kick it back to each of our panelists for final comments, but I think you've said it all already. But Omar, maybe we'll let you just make some final.
I was just going to say, we've done a lot of hammering on Health Canada, and somewhat appropriately so. But I will say, look, they have a very important role, right? Mm-hmm. We're not selling, we're not selling carrots. We are selling a regulated product, and a product that should be regulated, and that the federal regulator, Health Canada, has a very important role. What we're saying is that the public health aspect of cannabis policy should stay with Health Canada, but the government should take a broader economic lens to take a look at how this industry has survived, thrived, grown. What are the challenges? What's at risk in terms of jobs and employment, in terms of economic contribution, and how we can collectively take a holistic approach to talk about and address some of those issues, with Health Canada retaining their very important regulatory role with respect to public health and protecting public health.
George at cannabis-council.ca. All politics is local. Let's converge in Ottawa and make a bigger impact in the capital. And, thanks for the opportunity from the Chamber for bringing us all together, and reach out.
And to say, Omar, exactly the right point about Health Canada playing a role. They will always play an important role. I think the focus on research and getting the right answers to the questions that Health Canada still has, that's one of the focuses we need. And that requires industry working with government on it. So we agree with you, Health Canada's an important role. Let's help them. Let's bring some solutions to the table, but let's also get the other departments engaged.
Terrific. Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank all of our panelists. And again, I've done a lot of these moderating panels over God knows how many years, and this one has just been easy and also phenomenal, just in terms of the scope that we were able to cover, the really interesting thoughts. And frankly, you know, this is about as smart a panel as you're going to find and experienced a panel for things like this. So your time is greatly appreciated. Also appreciate all the audience members who tuned in, asked questions. I'm sorry if we weren't able to get to all of them. Understand we're going to go to a quick break now, but definitely be sure to come back here at 12:10. There's going to be a spotlight conversation with Loop Pool co-founders Ian Kwachansky and Rain Maida. You won't want to miss it. I certainly won't miss it. And thanks again to our panelists, and we'll see everybody back here at 10 after 12.
Thank you.
Thank you.